Investigators uncover huge bones.
Ready?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. All the way, all the way. Yes!
T-Rex was not just some brutish monster. It was a highly intelligent animal.
My gosh, is it scary. Tyrannosaurs are a group of big carnivorous dinosaurs that show up very late in the age of dinosaurs.
Some stories we believe we have already finished telling. For more than 100 years, the story of Tyrannosaurus rex has been one of them. And yet, for that entire century, nearly every museum placard and every textbook diagram has been built on a quiet mistake. We were reading the bones wrong. Not slightly wrong. We were missing whole years of this animal's life. Chapters erased before we ever learned to look for them. The reason is almost hard to believe. Hidden inside the fossilized bones were growth marks our bare eyes simply could not register. Even under the microscope, they were completely invisible under normal light. Locked within the mineral structure, they were only revealed when researchers passed a very particular kind of light through a thin sliver of fossil. When the results finally reached print in 2026, it did not settle the matter. It opened a deeper one, soil. Because in the middle of the work, two specimens turned up that refused to make sense. Fossils that different camps of scientists still argue about to this day. What the American researchers uncovered may be the most significant rewrite of the T-Rex story in your lifetime. But to understand why that matters, let's look at what we thought was the usual life cycle of T-Rex. In order to do so, we need to travel back 66 million years, to a place that would one day be called Montana. Picture the so-called Hell Creek Formation. It was a humid, low-lying world of swollen rivers and volcanic haze, a landscape that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Somewhere in a forest, something small is hunting. It weighs about 60 pounds. That's roughly the weight of a large dog. This is your future apex predator. This is Tyrannosaurus rex. But at this age, it is not the monster of your imagination. Surrounded by multi-ton plant eaters, armored ankylosaurs, and full-grown members of its own kind, this juvenile is not the hunter at the top of the food chain. It is prey. For generations, we have told the story of one of the greatest predators that ever roamed the earth only one way. It was a tale of total, inevitable dominance. That picture is burned deep into our culture. But that version of the story skips a chapter. Somewhere between the frightened 60-pound youngling and the 8-ton colossus lies a long stretch of grinding, dangerous, uncertain living. And it is precisely that stretch we have misunderstood for over a century. A new study led by Dr. Holly Woodward that was published in 2026 in the scientific journal PeerJ did far more than fine-tune a few numbers. As a quick side note, one of the scientists, Nathan Myhrvold, was Microsoft's first chief technology officer until the year 2000. He poured part of his fortune into fossil expeditions. His foundation has unearthed more T-Rex skeletons than everyone else in history combined. He once remarked that they hold the dominant T-Rex market share.
My scientific contribution to dinosaurs are in areas where you can apply computing and statistics and math. T-Rex, for example, is only known from about 30 specimens. So we've developed new statistical methods for analyzing dinosaur data. This is a growth rate curve for a T-Rex.
A technology billionaire, quietly accumulating fossils. What's your take on that? Let's get back to the study. The team examined 17 T-Rex individuals, from that dog-sized juvenile all the way up to towering adults approaching 8 tons. Their fossils kept records of everything these animals endured: a drought, a brutal winter, a season when the food simply ran out. Each hardship left a fine line in the outer layer of the bone, much like a ring inside the trunk of a tree. Scientists call these cortical growth marks. For decades, paleontologists claimed that T-Rex reached its full size at around 18 years of age. But the fossils, once read properly, with the use of specialized circularly polarized light, tell a very different number. These animals were not fully grown until roughly 40 years old, not 18. We were off by about 2 decades. That is not a small correction. That is an entire second life of hunger, injury, and sheer survival we never knew was there. So what were those missing years actually like? The honest answer is sobering. For perhaps 2 full decades, a young T-Rex lived in the most dangerous position any predator can hold. Already too large to disappear into the bushes like the smaller hunters, yet still too small to face the giant adults of any Tyrannosaurus species. Picture surviving in that kill zone for 20 years. This was never a sprint to the throne. It was an endurance test, run in a world that was actively trying to end you. Also, the fossils reveal its body mass did not even climb at a steady pace. Again, the proof is in the fossils. Pressed into the outer layer of nearly every bone are clusters of rings packed so tightly that they almost merge into a single dark band. Paleontologists call these multiplets. Each one records a year, sometimes several years in a row, when the animal barely grew at all. But here is where the story takes its strangest turn. 2 of the specimens do not fit the pattern at all. Among the 17 animals studied, they grew so much more slowly that the mathematical models could not hold them. When Woodward's team ran the individuals' growth curves, they did not simply land at the low edge of normal variation. They broke the analysis outright, and they had to be set aside entirely. Both are held today at the Burpee Museum of Natural History in Illinois. So what on earth were these 2 specimens refusing to fit the analytical models? Here the science turns genuinely contested. And this is a debate well worth knowing about. Just a few months before Woodward's team published, in late October 2025, 2 other scientists, Lindsay Zano and James Napoli, looked at the fossils too. They arrived at a different answer. They concluded these smaller tyrannosaurs were around 20 years old and already physically mature when they died, not youngsters at all. They carried larger arms, more teeth, and a shorter tail than any T-Rex. Anatomical traits fixed early in life, not something an aging giant grows out of. Zano and Napoli were therefore convinced that Nanotyrannus was real, a separate species that had been mistaken for young T-Rex. Consider where this leaves us. One team says the strange data alone proved nothing. Another has already assigned these same fossils to Nanotyrannus. Decide for yourself what to believe. For some paleontologists, the debate is still not settled. Tyrannosaurus rex, the animal that has shaped our very idea of prehistoric power, did not spend most of its life as a king. It spent most of its life becoming one. By the way, did you know that in more than a century of searching, no one has ever found a single Tyrannosaurus rex egg or nest? Everything we believe about its earliest days is borrowed from its closest relatives. On a different note, science correcting itself is nothing unusual. A growth model published in 2024 produced something unexplainable: negative body weights for the youngest T-Rex, a biological absurdity. The authors issued a formal correction in 2026, thanking Nathan Myhrvold for pointing the error out to them. It is exactly that tension, expert against expert, that keeps this field honest and also under tension.